Studying harder is the worst thing that any student can do. I see so many students, including myself, study for hours on end and beat themselves up for not studying harder, even though this keeps them stuck in a cycle of not getting the grades they want. In fact, realizing this one thing was what allowed me to break the cycle, win an award in medical school, and get high distinctions multiple years in a row. In this video, I'll explain why studying hard is ruining your life, how you can stop this from happening, and the simple learning strategy that I and many of my students have used to completely change their lives. Let's start with the problem with studying hard that traps so many students and destroys their personal growth. Getting good grades is a lot like baking, and bear with me on this one. In order to bake well, you need to have good ingredients and good baking skills. If you had good flour, eggs, sugar, and chocolate chips, you'd be able to make a good batch of cookies as long as you knew how to follow the recipe. But if the eggs and chocolate chips were rotten, there would be no amount of time you could spend on the recipe to make those cookies taste good. And this is exactly like studying. The ingredients are like your studying skills, and the time you put into the recipe is like the time you put into studying. This means that if you study ineffectively by not focusing, procrastinating, or using passive methods of learning, you'll never be able to get good grades no matter how much time you put in. But you might be thinking, isn't it true that studying harder will get you better grades? Well, it is true, but it's also not. And this is what makes so many students stagnate and feel like they're not smart enough to succeed. We've all been there. You get a bad result on one of your tests and you think to yourself, well, I didn't really study hard enough, so it's kind of obvious that I got this score. You tell yourself that you're going to study harder next semester. You might actually try to work harder, but what happens most of the time is that you end up at the end of the semester with the same grades because you weren't able to work harder consistently. When this happens, it's easy to start thinking that you're just a lazy person who's not cut out to succeed. The thing is, it is true that if you were to study harder, you'd probably get better grades. But the problem with this is that it doesn't take into account that the things stopping you from working harder in the first place are pretty hard to get over. You might struggle with procrastination, you might have habits of not studying effectively, or you might just have a lot of competing interests. What so many people aren't told is that it's not that they're lazy or that they're not smart enough, but that studying harder is a skill in itself that needs to be learnt and developed. So how do you improve these skills? Well, to do this, we need to understand the problems stopping students from making progress in life. Imagine you come home at 5 and you have until 10 to work, which gives you around 5 hours. Realistically, you have to spend around 2 hours on basic tasks, like eating, getting changed, and getting ready for bed. You need 1 hour to relax, and of the 2 hours left, what's most likely is that you'll spend half the time procrastinating and half the time actually working. The question is, if you had to dedicate some of this time to improving your studying skills, where would you take it from? Well, if you said you'd take it from your procrastination time, you'd actually be wrong, and let me explain why. The thing is, if you could stop procrastinating at the snap of a finger, you probably would. So the fact that you're doing it now is a sign of a lack of skills, not motivation. You can try to artificially increase your motivation and spend some of your procrastination time learning new skills, but this will never last in the long run because artificial motivation runs out extremely quickly. As a result, in this scenario with your current skills, you only really have 1 hour of true motivated time where you're motivated enough to do anything. So to break the cycle of using artificial motivation and failing, map out your realistic amount of motivated time that you have each evening. Be honest with yourself and assume that you'll procrastinate. Then you can be realistic and allocate a small amount of that time to work on improving new skills. This might mean that you have to sacrifice some studying time initially, but if you start improving your skills, you'll earn that time back exponentially without having to use any extra motivation. So once you've allocated the time, what should you do to start getting results straight away? Well, let me share the simple system that I've used to help myself and many of my students achieve their goals. It's based on understanding the 4 stages of competence, which will help you learn any skill that you want. So it's probably worth learning about. Imagine you're learning tennis for the first time. If you start playing without any instruction, you'd hold the racket wrong and you'd hit the balls far out of the court and you wouldn't even know why. This is the first stage, unconscious incompetence, because you're doing things wrong and you don't even know why or how you can fix it. Next, you might learn how you're supposed to hold the racket, but you might struggle to do it properly and still hit some balls out. This is the second stage, conscious incompetence, where you know what you need to do, but you just aren't able to execute on it properly yet. As you practice more, you might be able to start hitting the balls in consistently consistently with a bit of effort. This is the third stage, conscious competence, where you're able to do the right thing while thinking about it. If you practice more and more and you hit thousands of tennis balls, you might get to the point where you're able to hit the balls in without even thinking about it, which is the fourth stage, unconscious competence. The system works on each of these steps, and if you can apply it, I guarantee that it will change your life. The first step works on the stage of unconscious incompetence, and is what we've discussed about identifying motivated time and allocating time to work on your skills. If you don't even know what you're doing wrong, you need to allocate time to figure it out. The second step helps you move to the second stage of competence, and it's to be like a sponge. Absorb as much information about a skill as you can from as many different sources as you can find. Pick out what resonates with you the most and create a document of the different steps that you can try applying. This will let you move on from the second to the third and fourth stages of competence, which is the hardest part. But the next few steps will allow you to make that process 10 times easier. The thing is, it's easy to know what's the right thing to do, but it's a lot harder to be able to do that consistently. There's one thing that I've found helps students turn that knowledge that they have into habits they do, and it's this third step. The problem is that when we try to apply other people's tips to our lives, we often find that they don't work out in the way that we would hope. The thing is, this doesn't actually mean that these tips don't work, but that we need to adapt them to the unique situations in our lives. For example, one tip to reduce procrastination might be to remove distractions from your room, but your family might not respect this at all and just barge into your room when you're studying. This tip isn't necessarily wrong, but you might need to adapt it to your life by perhaps deciding to study at the library instead, where your family can't disturb you. The problem is that if you didn't take the time to think about this, you might not realize that there was a solution to your problem, and you might just give up on the tip entirely. As a result, at the end of each week, protect some time to reflect on the progress and challenges you've had with making changes to your life. Think of some potential alterations you can make to your system and set some goals for the next week to try experimenting with them. This brings us to the fourth step, which will help you reach the pinnacle, unconscious competence, where everything feels easy. The thing is, this system will guarantee you build up your skills, but it's easy for these skills to also deteriorate without you even realizing it. The solution is this fourth step, which is to audit your skills regularly. Take some time once a month to think about all of the skills that you're using and where they lie in the hierarchy of competence, so that you can realize if one of your skills is falling behind. Then you can reflect on that skill and target it with some experiments to bring it back to where it once was. So now that you know that studying hard isn't the solution, you probably want to escape unconscious incompetence. So watch this video here to figure out how you can start managing your time effectively.